So with that, because this is part of the Economics' How to Impact series, we will begin with our leaders here talking a little bit about the topic that they're going to introduce to us, particularly about ESG reporting and the financial benefits that will ensure its implementation in perpetuity. So Darsh, we'll get started with you.
Thank you so much, and thanks all of you for attending this lovely session today. Sustainability at Virgin at the group level is quite interesting. I oversee all 32 of our global multinational brands, and so very much have a thread through on different topics. The one with CFOs and reporting specifically is close to my heart. Specifically because this year, what I have done is started to work more closely with our CFO on really how to embed sustainability within our business in a very different way, and started to look at sustainability as part of innovation and think about it as in next steps versus just thinking about it as a cost to the business. So how have I done that? One of the tools we've used is embedding sustainability in a cross-matrix way across the organization, so it doesn't just become my job to do, or my team's job to do and to execute. We have key carbon accounting roles that are based within finance. So when you start to think about TCFD, SECR, ESOS, diligent and data, and due diligence, it's all embedded now within finance, and then from the supply chain point of view within procurement. So at the baseline, you're actually covering off a stronger foundation when you're starting to make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the previous sessions that I attended in this room also talked about this not being a siloed operation. It needs to be an integrated business play, and I'm glad the finance is leading it.
Yeah, I think, look, for a very long time, sustainability was quite siloed because most of the time people didn't understand what it is we were doing. Part of my role, specifically because we are such a branded business, is to try and translate what we're currently doing in sustainability in a very sort of holistic storytelling manner, and then actually leading that with impact, right? I'm very much a sustainability professional who works on hearts and minds, thinking about collaboration, creating communities versus the stick. And I feel like ESG reporting is very much something we're going to drown in terms of alphabet soup at some point. And so it's how to translate all of those complexities and make it a bit simpler so that it's a bit more tangible.
Thank you for that. And Ross, you know that many private companies are improving their ESG compliance following the Science Based Targets initiative. Now, why do you think this is happening, and how can they use carbon removals as part of their ESG and SBTi strategy?
Market integrity and credibility are the root cause there. I think if you look back at the history of this market, there have been lots of individual company-led approaches to carbon accounting and emissions reporting, and integrity bodies such as Science-Based Targets Initiative play an important role in validating science-based targets independently so that there's a common yardstick for all businesses. But that is not the sole arbiter of what good looks like in that industry. Darshana touched on some others. Depending upon whether you're publicly listed, you will have exposure to TCFD, CSRD, SECR here in the UK, other frameworks such as ECDI and private equity. So I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar with the alphabet soup of reporting frameworks that every sustainability manager now has to grapple with. But it's all about baselining and understanding where we are as organizations, but also as a planet today, to ensure that we can measure and improve and reduce our emissions footprint. Of course, a business has two levers available to them as they think of their sustainability strategy. One is decarbonization. The second is the credible use of carbon credits. And decarbonization is critical. We must transition to a fossil fuel-free society, movements to renewables, alternatives such as hydrogen and electrification of fleet and so on, sustainable fuels. If you think generally the direction of travel is about 85% of a footprint 90% of a footprint should be handled by decarbonization. And then you'll have what is known as hard to abate or residual footprint, where you can credibly integrate value chain aligned carbon credits to your strategy. And that is commonly accepted in many of these in many of these frameworks. If you take CSRD as an example, the ESRI E1 outlines mitigation efforts in line with the Paris Agreement, or the credible use of 5 to 10% of footprint being handled by carbon credits. And that's important because there's a broader challenge in this industry where these technologies need to scale and they need catalytic finance to be invested in them. So it's not an either or. It's a combination approach that ensures businesses are decarbonizing, but they're also investing in carbon credits in parallel, taking action beyond their value chain. And if you look at the data, businesses who are investing in carbon credits are generally decarbonizing faster. That moral hazard argument where, okay, you can just get businesses who will invest in carbon credits and they'll throw decarbonization out the window. In practice, that doesn't occur. If you look at the top businesses in the Science Based Targets Initiative who are both purchasing carbon credits and decarbonizing, like for like, they're decarbonizing faster than their peers and in other industries in parallel.
Yeah, I think our thought process also aligns very well with yours at GNFC. We believe that a two-pronged approach is needed, decarbonization and carbon credits, particularly when we are dealing with complex industries and scope 3 emissions.
Yes.
There is a place to get started. Now, that brings me to carbon budgeting and how it fits with your CFO and your plan for transformation. So maybe we can look at this through the lens of Virgin Atlantic itself.
Yeah.
At Virgin Atlantic, you have set some big goals to reduce carbon footprint by 2050. Particularly, I was drawn towards your 2026 goal, which is just about 2 years away from now, to have CO2 emissions per passenger reduced by 15% and using more sustainable fuel. So how will you adjust your carbon budgeting in the next few years, and how it is going to help you to continue to build on these goals while keep growing your business?
Thanks, that's a good question. I think I should clearly say up front that I'm not from specifically Virgin Atlantic. At the group level, we oversee all of the brands, but I can speak to some of that. So one of the things we're doing at the group level is the fact that carbon budgets actually follow a financial budget timeline within our company, so that every team alongside, getting their financial budgets once a year, starts to actually use their carbon budget at the same time. And that's properly embedded within the company. That means that it's a financial output that we are tracking. In terms of Virgin Atlantic and meeting their goals that they have currently set, with regards to the SAF mandate, most of the aviation industry is looking at a 10% by 2030 goal in terms of SAF use. And that SAF use, as we can actually broadly all see, is a very short market and dependent on whether SAF and feedstock supply is actually available. So in terms of sustainable aviation fuels, I think it's a buyer's market right now. Saying that, in terms of actually how do we work with carbon budgets for an airline from a group perspective, we're very much embedded and use their SAF book and claim system, which means that we then start to align with a carbon credit type scenario, and means that every decision that any customer actually makes has a better footprint.
Got it. Now that allows me to switch to another topic, and we'll come back to you on that.
I'll just jump in quickly.
Yes, please.
Darshana. I think amongst we see this through our customer base. We see CSOs and CFOs come to us the whole time. And there is a notable difference in strategic decision-making and ability to allocate capital in an organization from the CFO's office, which matters in this market because it presents differentiation, speed to market, the ability to deliver sustainable transformation in a business, because that's what the upside is here for for corporates and publicly listed companies, where they have quantified the internal cost of carbon, because it creates a psychology in an organization of the trade-offs that need to be made. And very quickly, if carbon credits are part of your strategy, you understand what the cost center impact of that is. Yes. And what the trade-offs are around CapEx versus OpEx projects on decarbonization. But organizations who have that in place can make those decisions faster than organizations who don't yet have it in place. It's just one of the big observations that we see in how we work with businesses, because we know this challenge is urgent, and speed matters.
And I think both of you touched on this topic about intentionality in financial budgeting to actually incorporate even carbon credits as part of the strategy. And then thinking this for long term would assure that your net zero planning process advances the right way.
Correct. I would only add, though, that throughout the conference, we've been talking a lot about carbon, and I absolutely understand that carbon and net zero is super important. But I think that at some point in time, we actually need to start looking at our social license to operate and social impact and cost from a human perspective, and start to add that into almost, even if it's a shadow cost to our business, because then I think that will actually drive very different decision making.
And I also I agree with you, and I also think that it's the hardest one. So we should get started as soon as possible, to your point.
And the cost differential is significant. So if you look at benchmarks for internal cost of carbon at the moment in 2024 varies from like $40 to $80, 2030, 50 to 100. But, Biden administration, who has incorporated a social cost of carbon in 2024, values that at $200. If you look at all of the downstream impacts that negative operations have on society, it is significant. So that makes sense from a budgeting perspective when you're thinking about adoption of some of these frameworks.
Got it. Now, Ross, being a climate tech leader, and since you are on the topic of engagement of CFOs in the journey, we cannot miss the topic of AI. Right. AI is everywhere, right? So the next the idea that we can focus on is how is Cloverly using AI and real-time data to improve a company's performance report, and how do these services help companies to show their ESG efforts more clearly and reliably?
It's a good question. We operate an open ecosystem of different vendors in carbon accounting who use AI in their core products. If you think of where Cloverly fits into the equation, corporate goes on the journey of record, report, reduce. We fit into the reduce part, but we also have technologies in our ecosystem who focus on record and report. And we see really interesting implementations of artificial intelligence in that ecosystem. One that immediately comes to mind is Scope 3. Dependent upon different supply chains and value chains, your Scope 3 can be immensely complicated, raw materials sourced from all over the world, the ability to work with imperfect data and make highly accurate estimations on emissions impact is important. Now, previously, you would have multiple FTEs in a finance team or sustainable finance team, ESG team working on this. You can now have one dedicated FTE who's working hand in hand with a carbon accounting tool powered by AI to abstract away much of the complexity in Scope 3 and have access to more perfect data for decision-making purposes. So that's one of the main use cases that we see, particularly in this space. My background in the last number of years has also been in the built environment. If you think of the built environment, it's responsible for 40% of emissions in terms of operational and embodied carbon. And extracting data from a large real estate footprint is incredibly challenging, particularly when you get into the millions of square footage. So interesting implementations around artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, AIoT, for real-time integration into ESG software to extract data across hundreds or thousands of buildings, depending upon your business model. If you're a real estate investor, you may have that size footprint. If you're a large multinational, you may have a footprint in the hundreds of buildings. So just solves for real time, and it solves for complexity, and it gets to deterministic data better. Whereas previously humans were working with more probabilistic data, they now have access to highly accurate data for decision-making purposes. So that has been very transformative in the last number of years, particularly for skills development in finance teams, using those solutions and establishing good working practices around them.
And I think to your point about touching on the built environment, having worked in the built environment like you, what I've realized is there is no dearth of data There is
Right.
enough data out there in different dashboards, but the challenge has always been about how one data speaks to the other.
Right.
So the synthesis, the inference, and most importantly, drawing an action plan that
Right.
converges towards the end goal. I think it's a struggle for
Yes.
many organizations, not just in the building sector.
Yeah, and you would be surprised. You see this a lot. We see this a lot. Like there will be organizations who you think are very sophisticated, but you go on a flight, you'll see somebody with a pen and piece of paper ticking things off. You go into a building, you'll see the same. There's still a lot of manual toil on this, and the ability to take data from abstract sources and centralize it through OCR technologies or artificial intelligence is now here. That removes a lot of that pain.
And also to assure, I believe, data integrity, because greenwashing and other stuff could also be overcome if you have a good AI rules-based engine that can read through these documents in an effective way.
Right, verification of data.
Absolutely.
A verification of data and alignment to industry benchmarks to ensure that there's no errors there.
So, Darshan, I saw a recent announcement of Virgin partnering with Amenity, I believe. And so you are sitting at the group level. So how is AI being used in Virgin? And how is it helping cross-sector leadership and cross-sector transformation within your own business units?
I think it's an interesting one. I think, firstly, I wanted to go to what Ross has been saying, because I feel the opposite. I feel like there's a space for AI in terms of integrating into business and creating efficiencies and understanding, but it's what you do with that data. So if you're collecting data for data's sake, where you have a water and an energy footprint, I think that the responsibility then is on how do we use AI is super key. With regards to Virgin, in terms of a group level, I think we're using AI in a very creative way. So for myself, it's more about thinking about the sort of systemic risks to the business, thinking about, what we need to think of as the next step, how to make all of the ESG reporting that we're currently looking at more efficient. But at the same time, I'm very aware that within the carbon budgets I've set, there's a limit to what the environmental impact of AI is going to achieve. And so there's constant balance between how sustainability wants to use AI, how innovation does, and how the brand does as well. And that's a really interesting space to be in, because I embed sustainability into your brand and design principles, into innovation and tech, into just even our email footprint. And so if you take all of that into account and sit with all of that data, you think, okay, where are we being most responsible and what impact is that actually going to have? And that's what the data actually allows me to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting perspective. Only at your scale, we can actually see those type of challenges. On one side, we're very excited about AI being introduced to all kinds of solutions, but your perspective on carbon footprint and how to balance that against other initiatives you have, particularly the carbon budget, is fascinating. And now, Ross, while introducing you, I talked about your role of focusing on both on a net zero world and a net negative world.
Right.
Particularly, you believe that there is a carbon removal process has got a very significant place. So how do you actually develop that? What is the direct relationship between that carbon removal process and the role of a CFO? And most importantly, how your specific climate financing tool features can accelerate a business emissions reduction strategy? And if there are global companies wanting to adopt your tool, how does it empower them to scale?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess to set the scene, I don't think it will be news to anybody in this room. If you look at different credible data sources, the UN Global Stocktake Agreement, IPCC scenario modeling for reaching a net zero world in line with the Paris Agreement, there is no scenario where we reach net zero without the use of carbon removals. There is no scenario where we reach carbon negative without the use of carbon removal technology in particular. So we will be having a very different conversation in future years, more around climate adaptation, if this technology and industry is not successful in driving change in corporate industry and the broader planet. I think if you think of the role of a CFO as a catalyst, an operator, a strategist for sustainability transformation, you can quickly see the connection with carbon removal technologies. If you're a corporate business and you've committed to science-based targets, or you have TCFD or CSRD exposure, you as a CFO will be looking at physical risk and transition risk to your business. What are the immediate risks to your business model? Does that present difficulties around business continuity in the future? And we know that wholesale changes to decarbonisation are occurring. So businesses are having to reimagine their business model. So the CFO, in lockstep with the CSO, is now in this transformative mindset where they need to be looking at climate technologies to understand what the future of the business will look like. So as part of that, if you accept the residual to get to net zero is 10 to 15%, CFOs will be looking at decadal procurement plans to ensure that the business risk is mitigated, where they have access to that supply in the future, and they're locking in those offtake plans now so that they can stabilize price, have availability to that inventory and supply in the future. Also thinking of the CFO as a change agent across the organization to ensure that the culture of carbon, the culture of sustainability is understood and aligned to financial KPIs, but also non-financial KPIs. If you look at double materiality under many of the reporting frameworks, right? It's not enough anymore to be a financially successful company. That stewardship role needs to be recognized, and this is proven out in industry. If you look at outcomes in industry, McKinsey looked at the private equity industry for businesses that had strong green credentials or net zero. They typically get a 10% premium on sale in private equity. If you look at commercial real estate, assets that are net zero or green certified buildings command a higher premium. AAA office stock commands a higher premium. So industry is starting to notice this, and it is paying back dividends where it matters, which is on the P&L. Our role as a business is to partner. We also believe in a stewardship model to partner with the CFO, partner with the CSO, and work through these challenges with them, how they think about short-term CapEx, OpEx investments, what's the right thing for the business, what outcome are they trying to create, and ensuring that they are making the right decisions, whether that is, really leaning into decarbonization, which of course we've discussed is 85% of the problem, but also thinking about the role that carbon removals plays in their value chain. We're also seeing some really interesting implementations there around strong value chain alignments to create circularity in those businesses with the communities and value chains that their products serve. So it creates that flywheel effect over time for sustainability also. So the CFO role has rapidly evolved, and it's in the advent of these compliance hurdles and these reporting frameworks. I think oftentimes as an industry we get very in the weeds on like esoteric reporting, but it's not reporting for reporting's sake. It's genuinely about business and industry transformation. And this is a construct through which that is possible alongside carbon removals.
Yeah, I think, earlier there was, again, in the previous session, there was an interesting topic made. As you make investments towards getting to net zero, it's getting harder and harder to make the business case. So a couple of topics that you touched on, the materiality risk, the risk in value chain, and with the post-COVID scenario where we saw risk in supply chain. So building the resilience in business operations and also the social costs that you talked about earlier, these are all things that we have not still analyzed properly or accounted properly. That could have a potential disruption in the entire value proposition of a business or in commanding the premium that you talked about.
Right.
So I think it's an interesting take that you were able to share with us. Now, Darsh, again, at your group level, first I was fascinated that you are one of the passengers in the plane that was created by Virgin Atlantic to fly that 100% sustainable fuel, the SAF. So that should have been pretty exciting to be in the number first category. So I know that you believe companies need to go just beyond regulatory compliance and look into the footprint of business activities. And that one way to do this is in focusing on business, overhauling the business travel. So do you want to comment on that and share your perspectives?
I think travel is super important in terms of it brings us closer together as families and organizations. It's a method of connecting and also of just doing general business, leads to adventure. And I think there's absolutely a space for it, within the economy. But what I think it does need to do is be a sustainable piece of travel. Being on, Flight 100, which was the first transatlantic flight by a commercial airline, was a next level and the next step in terms of what is out there and achievable. But what I would say is that it takes a machine of people and collaboration across industries and government subsidies to be able to do that. And so I think in terms of when we look at what's next, it is very much that. I know the government is looking at a SAF mandate within the UK. Hopefully by 2025, everyone says it's not going to happen, might be closer to 27. But at the same time, I think we need to be able to get there. And so every time that I speak to someone, we're actually taking baby steps on how to get there. I mean, if you look beyond just the airline industry, we have Virgin Voyages as well, which is how do we actually start to use biofuels in terms of the cruise industry and meet IMO targets by 2030, which is a super interesting space. So I think that broad base, we actually just need to get started. And for me, it's just about action.
Yeah, wonderful. I think we have a couple of questions from our audience, so we'll switch our attention to that. So the first question is, just for the benefit of all, what are the parameters you rely on to select different carbon removal technologies, and what due diligence you conduct? Who wants to take it?
I mean, I can start because obviously he's in the space. So I'm answering from a sort of corporate perspective. So the due diligence would be like with everything else in terms of how I would conduct due diligence, and we would conduct due diligence on a supply chain. But I think we've gone through a period now of not trusting carbon removal technologies, of having and needing more robust, I suppose, frameworks in order to hold them to account in terms of impact. And I'm normally for me, due diligence is absolutely key because, like I was saying to Ross before the panel, pitch to me and prove to me that what you're doing, has the best impact and is the right solution, whether it's actually CCUS or blue carbon or actual removals. I think there's very much a space for it and for carbon credits, but validated and integrity, credits.
Anything else you want to add?
I think that's the right perspective at a corporate level. Due diligence is critical. We as a business adopt a first principles approach when we look at each individual project using the latest and greatest around climate science and climate policy. We have an in-house team of climate scientists who scrutinize each individual project and look at technical documentation of each project, the LCA, the PDD, to ensure that it is a high-quality project. We then use the PAVR methodology, permanence, additionality, verifiability, enforceability, and authenticity, in addition to ratings agency data. So you can think of these like the Gartner, the Carbon Project World, to whittle the carbon markets down to a small list of project suppliers who we have high conviction that are quality, and those are used by businesses like American Express, Visa, Salesforce, and many more.
Yeah, and we have a next question. That's a very interesting question. Probably, Ross, you can take it. We talked about integrating finance and technologies and making an integrated play for sustainability. But how do you fund knowledge and capacity building? Where do you find the money for it?
In terms of external funding?
No, I think internal funding, because to fund your own team, I believe I am interpreting the question here.
Yeah.
How do you fund knowledge acquisition, training of your teams, internal capacity building so that you can get your job done?
Yeah, I think it's about building a learning organization, a learning culture. I think that comes from the top team in the organization, the exec team, to ensure that each individual team is constantly learning. And you hire for that in terms of the individuals you bring into your organization, ensuring that they're intellectually curious individuals and nurturing that over time through product training and industry training, and having that as a core part of their experience in your company. So it's something that businesses need to be intentional about. Of course, when you're on the treadmill, it's difficult to bypass these things, but has to be embedded in an organization. The best organizations out there are learning organizations, in my view. So, we do simple things that have weekly lunch and learns, or have development goals and somebody's OKRs for the quarter to ensure that there's consistency around that.
Yeah, I think the next question is also interesting. We talked a lot about benefits and opportunities, but we didn't talk about the challenges that comes with integrating CSOs and CFOs. And how do you tackle that? And could you elaborate a little bit more about the challenges you have faced?
Sure. So I think sustainability has historically always been seen as a cost versus a benefit. And proving and showing that benefit to your CFOs is super key in getting them on side. So not only the fact that, yes, you can drive down costs through efficiencies by carbon budgets or internal carbon pricing based on decision making, but also at the same time, how is it actually relevant to what you're currently doing? For me, I see it as being risk and resilience, piece for your business. I'm very much going to probably start to lobby my CFO to take into account ESG metrics as important as EBITDAs, and at the same time think that I think what sustainability does in terms of creating more resilient sort of strategies for the business is actually showing and proving to your CFOs that your money built on an unstable platform, there's actually no growth there. So how do we actually build together for a more stable economy?
Yeah, thank you both for your perspectives. I think we are to the fair end of this session. And thank you very much. And thanks to our audience. And, yeah, sure, please.